My message to Canadians, first and foremost, is I understand this sucks. This is not what anyone wanted for our Christmas holidays.
Yesterday, amid growing concern over the Omicron variant, the federal government announced new advisories against non-essential travel, and some provinces have now altered their public health measures ahead of the holidays.
The notion that we could just, cancel Christmas in an excess of caution, I don't think reflects what Albertans would be willing to tolerate.
We've been in this fight for almost 2 years now. We're all tired and wanting this pandemic to be over, but we're not done, not yet.
So, after almost 2 years, are Canadians tired of heeding advice from their politicians? It's Thursday. I'm here with, at issue, of course, Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see everyone. So, new advisories against travel. Some provinces like Ontario reducing capacity limits. What are we making of the way politicians are responding to the threat of this new variant at a moment when there is, it seems, a lot of fatigue, rightly so, inside the population? Althia, you want to start?
I think politicians have learned to take decisive action quickly and are waiting less than what we saw last year. Is it quick enough? I think a lot of people would say no. I think you're also seeing the federal government at the Liberal Party is taking a more prudent approach. We saw on a call this week that they were hoping that the premiers would agree to the banning of foreign travelers, people coming to go skiing, for example. Mm-hmm. There was pushback from the premier, as you see in Ontario right now, where you could still go to the restaurants and there is no capacity limits on that. And in Alberta, for example, that's probably not the response that you would expect. You're even hearing it in the Conservative Party, who is being, Aaron O'Toole is not telling his MPs, for example, not to travel. Yet last year, David Sweet basically got, tossed out for going on a vacation. So there are different approaches to managing this crisis, and I think federally what you're seeing is that whoever is in that hot seat, the minister, really does matter. I think that there's a different tone, a more forceful tone because of Jean-Yves.
Certainly more decisive. I think that seems to be the case too. Chantal, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to sound decisive, and it's another to have the capacity to implement the so-called decisions that you made. The case of
you saw
the decision that we were going to test some travelers that come in through airports, but not some others, when we never had the means to test actually most of them in any event, was a great example of the difference between what you want to do and what you're able to do. And I think what happened to the Prime Minister with the premiers this week was that he also suggested they should restore quarantine and testing at the airport, but they don't have, and the provinces do not have people to spare to do that. And so after all this time, you would want them to think about something that makes sense rather than something that sounds decisive.
Yeah. Andrew.
Yeah, you're seeing a more rapid response, shall we say, and more forceful sounding, but it's striking when you look at the types of measures that are being proposed. They're generally things that don't ask a lot of sacrifice of people. So we're going to get a lot more booster shots, we're going to get a lot more tests, but we're not going to see much in the way of, lockdowns and restrictions on movement. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe that's the stage we're at now. But I think it's also a recognition of public fatigue. Yeah. And I wonder whether that's an unfortunate situation because I fear that we're once again falling behind the exponential numbers. This thing is going to grow, it's doubling every 3 days. And it's hard for us to wrap our mind around that. So people are once again saying, what's all the commotion? Nobody's died from this yet, for example. I'm afraid we may once again fall behind the curve of what's actually necessary.
Chantal, you went in there?
I'm not sure.
Yes, I do think that it's not just people's fatigue. I think it's government's fatigue. They thought they were home safe up to a point with vaccines. Yeah. Now, not only are they finding that they're not, but I don't think they've gotten their minds completely around the reality of what's happening and what that is going to mean. And if they let it go for very much longer, and they are up to a point letting it go, I don't know what this will look like in January.
Althia?
I expect we'll have lockdowns. You can't listen to the science tables and see their modeling and think that everything's going to be fine if we just continue the way we're going. It clearly is not going to be fine. I want to go back to Chantal's point because I think it's a really good one. And when the federal government here came out with the border measures saying that everybody coming from flights abroad would have to get tested, not people from the US though, they didn't have the implementation measure. And I think that the lesson that was learned in the past 2.5 weeks was they really wanted to get their ducks in a row for this week's announcement. And so I mean, it's sad that it's come to that point, but when you look at the AG's report from, the pandemic, the lack of checks, the kind of the chaos that you have rules, but they're not actually followed, at least, it's sad that it's taken this long to get to where we are, but at least the government is recognizing that implementation is a key part and it's not just the announcements.
So the fact that there's all this different kind of political messaging, because it doesn't seem coherent, certainly from one province to the next ahead of the holidays, because they're taking different approaches and federal advice is different. We don't recommend you travel, but you're not banned from doing it. How does all that sort of factor into how people are supposed to deal with this and how politicians deal with it? Chantal, yeah.
I think the fact that it's Christmas and the holidays, that's throwing a major wrench in anything that governments want to do, be it administering boosters. The people who work in the healthcare system certainly expected to take a bit of a breather for Christmas. Are you seriously going to tell Canadians that suddenly they're going to have to stay home on December 15th? After having allowed people to buy plane tickets and having no way to actually stop them from going. Yeah. And when I talk about the difference between sounding decisive and actually implementing, I don't just mean Justin Trudeau and his government, who I believe have failed that test 2.5 weeks ago. I also include provinces that say we're going to offer boosters to everyone 18 and over. Yes, okay, but do you have the means to do it? And do you know that you're actually giving those boosters to the people who need it most? I'm not so sure.
Andrew?
Everyone was taken by surprise from this. Everybody is scrambling to catch up, and therefore you're getting a lot of mixed messaging. And as Chantal says, a lot of wishes and hopes that might be taking the place of actual policies. I don't doubt that we may yet end up in lockdowns, but we'll wind up with them 2 or 3 or 4 weeks too late. And as I say, once again, the arithmetic of it is going to confound us. The evidence does seem to be that this is a milder virus in its effects. But if you get enough cases, then even with a lower, death rate per cases, you're still going to have a lot of deaths.
Yeah. Althia, last word.
And even that's not actually totally clear. I just want to go back to something you said about the not travel. Like, I feel like at some point people need to take their responsibility for their own actions. The federal government, it would take them a lot to say, do not travel. Like, they tell you don't travel to Afghanistan, but, avoid all unnecessary travel basically means don't travel. They have said don't travel like over 9 times during that press conference this week, and they have been laying the groundwork for that messaging for the past few weeks. If you go abroad, you could get COVID, and then you're stuck and you have to pay that bill, and your insurance may not cover you. And the government, why should it be to the taxpayers who followed all the rules to come pay for you to leave that other country? You might not even be able to get on a plane if you have COVID. Yeah. People need to realize that it is a risk that they are taking themselves, and it should not be up to the government to come and save them.
I feel like Chantal has one more thing.
Yes, except that when you live in a province, I'll name Quebec, and the health minister 4 days ago is saying it's okay to party with 20 people. This is 4 days ago. Today, hospitals, because hospital workers are not safe from this variant. Hospital workers are going to Christmas dinners and falling ill. Yeah. How would you want people to say, I need to take my responsibilities when they're getting all these conflicting messages?
21 months ago, a global pandemic reached our shores. Few of us had any idea how long it would last or the toll it would take. This economic and fiscal update provides Canadians with a transparent report of our nation's finances. It also includes targeted investments that will ensure we have the weapons we need to finish the fight against COVID-19. an effort more urgent now than ever with the surge of Omicron.
As COVID cases rise, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tabled very much an Omicron-focused fiscal update, pledging billions in new COVID supports as cases rise. 96-page document is focused on the fight against COVID, something Freeland described as our most important national project. But how does a country recover while still fighting the pandemic and still with lots unknown? At issue back for another round. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, you want to start us off here? What in that update? What did that update tell you about whether the recovery is like entrenched or whether this is still a very fragile place to be?
Oh, I think the numbers in the economy are quite good, actually. We've recovered all of the lost ground in both output and employment. I think they make a point of saying that GDP for this year is exactly what they predicted back in the 2018 budget. And politically, you'd think that would present a problem for them because a lot of the spending was justified, not just in the name of fighting the COVID, but also, stimulating the recovery. Well, the case for stimulus has kind of fallen away. They're supposed to be encountering the fiscal guardrails by now, and we're not hearing a whole lot about that. So it's hard to pay much attention to this because we all know the real action is going to be in the budget. And so all these numbers that they put in here projecting spending 4 or 5 years out are about to become obsolete within a matter of minutes. So this is a problem with all of these exercises is they always march out these seemingly modest increases in spending for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And no one goes back and checks, well, wait a minute, did the whole curve shift up in each iteration of this, which is in fact what happens. Each spending track that they issue is, 10, 15, 20, $30 billion higher every year than the one that preceded it. But we tend to forget that.
Yeah, and become inoculated to the size of the numbers too. Chantal.
Okay, 3 points. That excerpt you played actually aged well. It actually sounds more appropriate today than it did on Tuesday, which is really what you want if you're going to be doing this exercise. Sure. Second, yeah, we did get a good sense of the lay of the land, but no roadmap. And no one is denying that. The roadmap is supposed to come in the next budget. But what I find interesting about that is that it has allowed Chrystia Freeland to keep a lot of expensive platform commitments on hold, to be put into play in the budget or maybe not. And I found that really interesting, that the commitments are still there, but she still has the capacity to speed them up or slow them down in that budget.
Althia?
I was surprised, not from this economic update, because I think it could have been a separate piece of legislation, but some of the things that they promised in the election, that election that was supposed to be fundamental, that was the reason why we were bringing the country to the polls was because, the times required it, big, bold change. And there is nothing. Like, even there was supposed to be a tax increase on the big banks effective January 1st. They have ignored that completely. That could have been in the fiscal update. It isn't. The fiscal update is basically COVID related. There's $5 billion for BC, obviously, to help them, and money for Indigenous, the children, the $40 billion, some of it backdated from the previous year. To Andrew's point, he's entirely right. This will be all the projections that are now that looked quite rosy, and I think have taken some of the sting from the Conservatives' attacks, won't be there in the spring if they come forward with all of the spending. I think the question, though, is will they actually come forward with all that spending? Will they argue in the spring that that spending is no longer needed?
Or that they just don't have capacity for it.
Or has
that
to be
they're
paced
focused on growth and productivity, and that circumstances have changed, and that they don't need to be spending all that money anymore.
Yeah, Chantal?
But that actually is okay. Up to a point. I'd rather have a government that gives itself more time to see where the dust is settled than a government that rushes to give you big ticket items that maybe are not needed or maybe can't be afforded.
Last word, Andrew.
Yeah, and one of the fundamental differences being they don't have the Bank of Canada to buy up the bulk of the bonds anymore. So with inflation, running near to 5%, they've got to be very mindful of, at what interest rate can they tempt people into buying their bonds in the future.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, everybody. Thank you very much. Well, we'll sort of see you next week, but I won't really see you because anyway, good to see you tonight. Thank you, appreciate it. Andrew, Chantal, and Althea, thanks, guys.